This episode contains topics that may be sensitive to some listeners. Check out the show notes for more information. Thank you for tuning in.
Time, weather, and pass.
Our Sphere with Spark. Good morning, kiddos. Welcome to another episode of Our Sphere with Spark here on the NVBC. I am Stanton Spark, and this week we are covering another species on our wonderful planet, the Dock-Ulfa. Say it with me now, kids. Dock-Ulfa. Dock-Ulfa. The Dock-Ulfa are more commonly known as night elves. Way easier. Some of you might even be descended from them. Grey skin, anyone? Dock-Ulfa are said to be akin to dwarves or other underground dwellers. Although night elves are generally a lot nicer to look at. You can recognise night elves by their long, sharp ears and grey skin, ranging from light to darker grey, sometimes even with a hint of blue. Their average height is around 198 centimetres for males and 187 centimetres for females. They're probably taller than you are. Night elves are built for a colder climate. They prefer the north for their long winters. During these winters, they can easily roam outside without the sun affecting their sensitive eyes and skin. Even in summer, the sun in the north is more forgiving. You see, night elves have much better and more sensitive eyesight and hearing than most other species. Question time! As always, our young audience is able to ask questions about this week's subject. This week we'll be answering Luke's question. Take it away, Luke.
Hi, Stanson. I really love the program.
Thank you for that, Luke. We love you too. Sorry for the interruption. Let's start that again.
Hi, Stanson. I really love the program Warriors of the Night.
Oh, well, I'm sure if you are listening to me, you love my program too. Anyway, let's listen to Luke.
In Warriors of the Night, the elves have magical powers. Is that true? Is it possible to get magical powers? Thank you for the answer, Mr. Stanson.
Great question, Luke. For the longest time, I thought they did. Some elf at my school always told me he did anyway. However, that's a lie. They are strong and fast and their senses are heightened, but they are not magical. They do practice rituals such as the wild hunt and the celebration of the summer solstice. Another difficult word, kids. I told you you'd be smart when listening to Spark. And that's it for night elves. Next week we'll talk about a different interesting species. Maybe we'll cover what you are. Wait until after the ad break for the reveal of our next subject and ask your questions to get featured next week. Just like Luke. Thanks for listening. This was Stanson Spark with Our Sphere with Spark. Goodbye. Your children will be smart when listening to Spark.
There's a rot in the heart of this city.
The new Vilirth Metropolitan warns about the dangers of a new drug overtaking the streets.
The government launched a campaign against the use of neomorphic memories.
This city's nothing but copper and visions of the past.
It's a black day. For all of us.
Who doesn't dream of the times gone by?
Unsavory figures can no longer hide in the shadows.
Such is my promise.
Wake Up, New Vilirth. Chapter 2. Keep it dark. The door to Kazimir von Leirkov's study was closed, which meant he was busy, either with work or with indulging himself otherwise. Usually, I would have turned around, but today I pushed through the doors after a hasty knock. The office was stately, with a herringbone wooden flooring, thick blue carpet, and a mahogany desk at the center. Bookshelves lined the walls, although I had never seen Kazimir read anything except for law proposals and lengthy contracts. Despite the room being relatively large, it felt cramped compared to Kazimir's previous office. He had stubbornly ordered all the same furniture to be moved into this new office when we had to scale down. Its walls were even the same sapphire color. The desk was disassembled and refinished to hide where they had to cut it to fit it through the door. Not that it mattered how big the office was. I felt claustrophobic in any room my father was in. Kazimir sat behind his desk. He hadn't heard my knock and shot up from his leather chair when I barged in.
What are you... Konstantin?
A thin tube came out from behind his ear where it was embedded into his skin. Clear fluid seeped through it. Kazimir pulled at the tube. It came out clean. I knew he had a connector installed a few moons ago. Sasha had told me so. Up to this point, I'd tried to ignore it. Kazimir's pointy ears shielded the tube from sight. He combed his white hair over any evidence for good measure. Several precious drops, worth hundreds of coparium shards, spilled onto the floor before Kazimir could stop the flow.
What are you thinking, boy?
He looked flustered. I'd only seen him like this a handful of times. His tie untied and his hair ruffled. I had no desire to know what kind of memory Kazimir von Leirkov had been enjoying.
Sir, pardon me, I would not have disturbed you, but there's been an explosion in the mines, sir.
Kazimir's eyes narrowed. He leaned over the desk, placing his hands on the table. I looked a lot like him. White hair, bright yellow eyes, the same nose. Yet his figure was imposing, broad-shouldered and tall, and I'd only received one of those features. His gaze fixed on me.
How many did we lose?
6, sir. 11 wounded. They spotted the cranier again, but I quieted that before the press came.
Did we lose any materials?
I dreaded answering this question.
Yes, sir. One of the drills has been damaged and several entrances that led to the new copper vein have collapsed. The railway will also need to be repaired, but... Sir, there are still miners stuck in one of the shafts. They require assistance.
Where exactly are they stuck? Does that shaft lead to the surface?
No, sir. They are stuck in a shaft leading further into the mines. I believe they went there to try and escape the rockfall.
They can wait. Focus on reopening the entrance to that copper vein.
Sir, I don't think they can wait.
The words were out of my mouth before I could stop it. Kazimir leaned forward, and I automatically stepped back.
Did I ask for your opinion?
No, sir.
Any progress on finding a way to kill that beast?
No, sir.
Is there anything you are competent in?
I apologize.
Send out mechanics to fix the railway as soon as possible. And for fuck's sake, make sure they kill that thing. We have a shipment to fulfill next week. Those bullets won't make themselves. I have other things to worry about than some wild animal. The Vanguard will be using this as an opportunity. If we aren't careful, our entire personnel will be in their workshops before the end of this moon. If there is another attack, the damage will be on your name, son, and those deaths you care so much about. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Speak up! What are you, a 10-year-old girl?
Yes, sir.
I realized the mistake I'd made.
I mean...
Should we start calling you Konstantin now from now on? Get out. I've heard enough.
And?
My cousin was a head shorter and a few years younger. Her dark gray skin and white hair were signature of the von Leirkovs. It was about the only thing Sasha had in common with the rest of our family.
Don't pretend like you didn't listen in on everything.
Well, I wish I hadn't.
That's what you get for being a snoop.
How are you going to save those people?
She followed me down the marble staircase.
I'm not. I have more to do.
I needed a plan. Or some order, at least. I would need to return to the mines later today to see the actual damage, and not the damage the media circus was causing.
But you can't just leave them by...
I can, and I will.
Sasha opened her mouth in protest.
They knew the risk, and so did their families.
It doesn't work like that if you don't have a choice.
I pretended not to hear her. It was clear she didn't quite understand how things worked around here. She could be endlessly optimistic. I had no idea who she'd gotten that trait from. Certainly not from her parents.
You wouldn't happen to know anything useful about killing a cranier, would you?
Well, I know you'll be dead long before managing to get that creature killed. Best to shut down that part of the mine, throw as many stones down the hole it came from, and hope it's either squashed to death or doesn't care enough to dig a new tunnel.
So nothing useful.
When we had first been notified of the beast in the caverns, I had sent my assistant Helmut to the library. He spent 2 days there, reporting on what was known about the beast. It hadn't helped. Researchers had more to do than research some cave-dwelling monster. They were busy finding new ways to prevent famine by creating new races of crops less susceptible to the heat. I too hadn't cared about some monster compendium. Until now. If it wouldn't cost me my head, I would have heeded Sasha's words and collapsed the entire cave. Sasha rolled her eyes at me.
Or you could hire the Oneir Vanguard. The people they send on memory hunts are far more capable than those inexperienced doozies that you have walking around.
They loved calling themselves that, as if they were an organization and not the criminal scumbags of the underground.
That's enough ideas for the day.
Sir?
Leave it.
I took my coat from the rack and put on my dusk mask. The butler handed me my wide-brimmed hat to protect me from the harsh sun. She opened the door for me and Sasha to stroll out into the bright afternoon. A layer of red sand still hung over the city of New Vilirth. Sand from yesterday's sandstorm crunched under my polished shoes. I crossed the pavement and ducked into a sleek black car that was still waiting for me in front of the von Leirkov office. Sasha slid in next to me.
Home.
The chauffeur nodded, and the car slid seamlessly into the ongoing traffic. I leaned back and closed my eyes. A weight pressed against my forehead. It had been pressing there all day, but in moments of stillness, it intensified. The drive took less than 5 minutes, but by the time the car turned onto my driveway, my headache had gone from a 6 to an 8. I opened my eyes to find Sasha watching me in silence. Quickly, I straightened and removed my hand from where it had been subconsciously massaging my temples.
What?
You said you'd get that checked out.
I did.
Half-truth. I had mentioned it, offhandedly, to my physician. He had given me the advice to sleep more and drink enough. I kept it at that. I didn't need my father to know his wimpy son was complaining about headaches. The chauffeur opened the door. I secured my dust mask and got out. The townhouse that lay in front of me was a fraction of that of my father's, but it was nice and comfortable enough for 2 people. And Sasha, if she wanted to escape her family. The townhouse included a driveway, which was rare enough in the city. It also had something that resembled a garden. My butler opened the door. One of the few personnel we had kept, besides a chauffeur, a cook, and a maid. Years ago, the staff in every house had been considerably larger. I didn't even have a full-time gardener anymore. Now we hired someone once in a while.
Sir?
I ignored the butler, a human. Our family preferred to employ humans, or certainly beings with lesser hearing capability than our own. It ensured a lot less eavesdropping. I held out my coat and mask.
I'll have some lunch. Sasha is joining.
Yes, sir.
The butler disappeared down into the kitchens.
Her name is Cleo, you know.
I am aware.
You could use it?
I lifted an eyebrow.
Are you going to spend all day criticizing me?
Yes.
She drifted off into the living room. I rolled my eyes and turned the opposite way into my study. It was similar to the room my father had, but I had tried my best not to let it be the same. For one, the colors were different, green instead of blue. I had opted for a desk that didn't suffocate the room, and I had actually read the books. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it.
Time, weather, and pass.
I was sitting and staring at a spot on the carpet when a knock came on the door.
Come in.
Nadya pushed the door open and slid inside.
Sasha has already started on lunch. It's ready if you want something.
She wore a red dress more fit for a gala than for an afternoon at home. She liked to dress like this. I didn't understand why. It didn't seem comfortable.
I'll be there in a second.
Nadya withdrew an ice pack from behind her back.
She also informed me you have a headache.
I accepted the ice pack and placed it against my temple. At least it distracted me from the pain.
It's back. The cranier.
I heard. You'll figure it out, though.
I'll need to go there, so I won't be home for dinner.
Nadya nodded. I was unable to read her face. Her skin was a lot paler than mine, almost rosy, like a human. Her ears were still pointed, yet far less sharp than mine were. She was a half-elf. The Minayev family, however, was rich enough to make their way into the elite despite their murky heritage. Nadya brushed the leather couch with her slim fingers. Around her neck shone a golden engagement pendant. The soft red stone came from the mines. We barely sourced any rubies from the mountains, and the gold around it even less so. I had planned a year ahead to get her this jewelry.
I'll be right there. I just need to make another call.
Nadya understood the request. She got up and left the room. I picked up the phone. The coiled wire knocked my glass over. I grabbed it before it could roll off the desk, then dialed the number. The caller's tone rang in my ears as I pressed the ice pack against my temple. I would have to see it for myself to make a decision. Perhaps one of them could tell me what to do about a monster that barely had any known weaknesses and could operate in complete darkness. Even for night elves, the absolute darkness in the mines was impenetrable.
Helmut, good evening.
Sir?
It happened again. We are going to need a mechanic team down there.
Time, weather, and pass.
My chauffeur closed the door behind me and walked around the car to get behind the wheel. My townhouse lay in the southern part of the city, close to the sea, which meant we had to cross the entire city to get to the mines in the north. As soon as we passed the gate and left my secluded neighborhood, we rolled into the late afternoon traffic of the city proper. The roads became less sprawling, and homes were small and poorly maintained by its residents. I leaned back in my leather seat and watched the city take off their suits and head into the evening, whatever that was filled with for its denizens. Around me, the city's true character began to unfold. The vast majority of these buildings were empty and defaced. Those that weren't had their windows covered up to block out the sun and sand. Traces of the old city lured behind the facades of old buildings. Geometric lines painted the character of a city from years before that I barely remembered. When New Vilirth was still Vilirth, before the crash and when everything came in abundance. That had been at least 20 years ago. I was a little boy back then.
Sir, Mr. von Leirkov?
I blinked and sat up straighter. I met my chauffeur's eyes in the rearview mirror. What?
I suggest going through the underground to avoid traffic.
I now noticed that we had barely moved at all. As of yet, I could just make out the first buildings of the campus district, and the mountains lay far beyond. Was decent infrastructure too much to ask for? I'd rather not. I glanced at my watch. But we'll have to, if we want to make it in time. My chauffeur nodded curtly and pressed a button. The glass in the back of the car darkened to stop people from looking in. The road followed what had once been the train's entrance to the underground. We landed in another maze of roads, but this time under the city, using the structure of the metro. Shops lined what used to be the platforms, and roads now ran where the tracks had once been. A sour smell began to fill the car. I wrinkled my nose. I caught my chauffeur's eyes in the mirror. The chauffeur dragged a lever to the right, blocking out the oppressing odor from the outside. We drove past a pocket of buildings and shops that was particularly disheveled. A woman stumbled past our car. I leaned back from the window, watching her in disgust. Tubes were crudely embedded behind her ear. The shaved skin was covered in scabs. The tubes attached to a handmade pump, which in turn was attached to a plastic bottle. Her eyes were blank. The stuff in the bottle was murky brown, almost as if it was water scooped straight from a river. Still, I recognized it as what it must be, gauging from the dreamy look in her eyes. I would never understand why people would do that to themselves. I looked away from the scene and pressed a button on the panel next to me. The windows darkened completely.
Time, weather, and the past.
We're here, sir.
I sat up. I hadn't nodded off exactly, but I had slipped into thoughts about the task ahead. I got out of the car. My shining black shoes touched the gravel. A cloud of dust blew my way and instantly covered me in a layer of red powder. I grimaced. 2 figures waited for me, flanked by 6 senior security officers. Their faces were covered in enough dust that I barely recognized them. The masks they wore also didn't help. Behind them, mine carts rattled to the surface, coming from the depths below. Miners unloaded them onto conveyor belts and into the machines that sifted for precious metal. One of the officers stepped forward to hand me my mask. It wasn't a regular cloth mask. It covered my entire face and went into an active filtering system. I stood still as the officer strapped it to my back. My father had these clear masks made. To allow for the eyes and mouth to be visible, they had to be full-faced, impractical and suffocating. But everyone should recognize the von Leirkovs as they stood before them, or so Kazimir had said. Their style looked nothing like the fabric masks the miners fabricated themselves.
Welcome, Mr. von Leirkov!
The man in front of me wore the same full-faced mask as me, naturally, as he was the one who had created them. He was one of our lead scientists.
Dr. Patterson!
I turned to the woman beside him.
Dr. Vieira?
She, too, was wearing one of the full-faced masks. As the lead scientist, she, of course, had that privilege. Behind the mask, her dark eyes assessed me.
Let's get going. I have other things to do.
Clearly, she wasn't happy about being assigned here. It wasn't usually her job, but they had no one qualified for a cranier attack. Dr. Vieira turned around and marched towards the opening of the mines. The rest, including me, followed suit. I glanced up. Before us, the mountains above the mines reached into the sky, and beyond them stood Mount Spinell, bathing in the afternoon sun. The volcano had last erupted 26 years ago. It would be at least double that before it happened again, but it still made me uneasy to look at.
Stick to the group, Mr. von Leirkov. You don't want to get lost here.
I had stopped in my tracks unconsciously. I picked up the pace and followed the group into the dark opening of the mines. We arrived at a large iron gate. Dr. Vieira pressed a long sequence into a code pad on a metal box and opened the small door.
Your turn, Mr. von Leirkov.
Dr. Vieira stepped aside. I stepped forward and typed in the code. We waited in silence until a green light beeped. I then took out a key, one that I had never used before, even though my father had given it to me years ago. I unlocked the gate and slid it open. Despite its size, it barely made any sound. Lights in the ceiling showed a corridor that led towards an elevator.
I don't suppose you've ever taken an elevator down a mine shaft.
A security officer mockingly studied my crisp suit. My cheeks warmed, but I turned to the officer with a straight face and took my time looking him up and down.
What is your name?
The officer froze in his tracks.
Daniel Zatar, sir. I didn't mean to insult, sir. It was just a joke.
Right. Walk in front. Instead of making jokes, you do better to just do your job.
Yes, sir. I apologize, sir.
I nodded, using the silence that fell as a threat. He hurried ahead. I stepped into a rattling elevator alongside Dr. Patterson, who looked as uneasy as I felt. The elevator, or rather a cage, rattled even before it went down. And when it started moving, it creaked loud enough to make any conversation impossible. Even so, these people didn't seem to be the ones for small talk. When we got out of the elevator, everything was dark. Pitch black. A flashlight flicked on, coming from Dr. Vieira, followed by several more. The small beam of light illuminated a very narrow, endless tunnel. Cold sweat clung to me. I tried not to think about the idea of getting stuck down here. I made sure to follow Dr. Vieira closely as we walked along in silence. We took several more elevators down and walked for what felt like a whole bell. My feet were tired and painful in these shoes. And this far underground, it wasn't exactly warm. But I kept going without complaint. I wasn't going to prove them right. Finally, Dr. Vieira stopped in her tracks. 6 beams all pointed in the same direction, illuminating a cavern. Or at least, what would have been a cavern if half of it hadn't collapsed. Several people with mining helmets and small headlights were digging at the pile of rubble. The von Leirkov emblem shone on their chests. The arm of a drill stuck out from underneath the stone. I was glad the light shone mostly in that direction, and not on the piles of rubble with what might be human limbs sticking out from underneath. I noticed one of the miners was kneeling next to a body with what looked like a medical kit. I averted my gaze and caught Dr. Vieira watching me, lips thin in disapproval.
Here you go, Mr. von Leirkov. I suppose you've come here to tell us how to fix this?
I ignored her words. My father would have gotten her shot, but there were enough bodies around here already. Any sightings of the Cranier?
No, but we do have another problem.
He pointed his beam into the cavern. About 20 meters above us sat a dent in the wall.
We're not just dealing with a Cranier, sir.
He angled his beam to show off 5 eggs that glowed like dark quartz in the beam of the flashlight.
I'd say they are about a week from hatching, and we have no way to get up there without the danger of the cavern collapsing.
With her finger, she drew my eye to a crack in the wall just above the eggs.
Or drawing the attention of their dear mother.
She shone her flashlight onto the walls and turned around in a circle. The beam slid across the shimmering rock. They shone with the promise of wealth.
All hells.
Time, weather, and the past.
Wake Up New Vilirth is created, produced and written by Lisa van Hees. Directed and co-produced by Iris-sanne van der Aar. Our brilliant team of voices consists of Liam van Poorten as Konstantin, Samantha Bonouvrie as Sasha, Yannick Staal as Kazimir, Fey Lehiane as Nadya, Lin Schalken, Joris van de Waterbeent, Tom van Hull and Daan Helmendach as our radio hosts, and Reno van Oostrum, Ezra Menard, and Isa Marley as our supporting voices. Sound recording by Lisa van Hees and Jonas van Impe. Sound editing by Jonas van Impe. Sound design by Lode Woltersom. Music by Freya Terpstra en Teun Zeidner. Radio design by Joris van de Waterbeent. Directing assistance by Tom van Hull. Cover art by Matt Roodhuizen. For a full list of our wonderful team, go to wakeupnewvilirth.com. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed your stay.